Hello, Mark.
Hi, Vincent.
Thank you very much for taking time to answer my question. You're senior analyst for VisionMobile. Can you present VisionMobile and your mission and basically what you're doing there?
Well, VisionMobile is the leading research company on the app economy. They have strong specialisms in developer economics and trends and in mobile business models. We basically believe that digital platforms and developers are the future of how we're going to work, communicate, and play. So everybody needs to understand developers, and if you're running a business, developers will be involved at some point. It's the whole software eating the world kind of a theme. VisionMobile tries to map that future out for people, help companies create the new version of their future in that space.
Okay. And so there is a study you just released, the new edition called Developer Economics. What is the point of these studies? And so, again, you just released the last one, so it's really exciting to have the new inside of it. So can you tell a bit more about that?
Developer economics studies have been running, they're very initially annual, but I think it's 2010, the first ones, but they went twice yearly. This one was the 7th. Each one has been growing more and more developers. So in the first quarter of this year, we were a little short of 7,000, 6,000 something developers. And this latest report was based on responses from 10,000 developers. So we've got a pretty big sample of people responding now, and it gives us very good insight into which platforms developers are working with, what tools they're using, how they're doing revenue-wise, that kind of thing.
Okay.
A lot of
and
insight.
how do you manage to get the interest and get developers respond to your study? So because 10,000 is a lot, right? So how did you manage that?
Well, a lot of developers really have enjoyed taking the survey because we ask questions about a lot of areas. And when we ask the questions, we have a list of things like, do you use these things? And a lot of those things developers might not have been aware of before they took the study. So it gives them new areas to look into. But we do have prizes as well. So when you complete the survey, you get entered into a prize draw. We usually give away the latest devices. I think the last one we gave away an iPhone 5 or 5S or something, and a Samsung Galaxy S5, and the latest and greatest, and a few other kind of geeky gadgets. I think we gave away a really high-end keyboard and a little iPad-controlled or iPhone-controlled robot ball, and things like that. Just things that developers like, toys. So a few prizes of that. We also have a lot of partners. So in the survey, you'll see there are a whole load of media partners, community partners who spread the word about the survey and encourage their users and followers to take part. And for some of those larger partners, we give them some insight into the developers that they send to us. So if their developers all take the survey, we can send back and say, here's a profile of your developers. That helps them. So it's kind of win-win there.
Yeah. Okay. One of the key figures, personally was really interesting, is that we know app development is really on the hype, there is a gold rush, but basically we know that there is few winners. And so you find out that the majority, or let's say half of the developer earn only $500 per app per month, which you called below the app poverty line. So there is really a huge concentration on that. How do you explain that? And basically, is it surprising at the end of the day?
I don't think it is surprising. You see the same thing in most creative industries, in recorded music or ebooks, things like that. There are a lot of people trying, quite a lot of amateurs trying, and you don't expect them necessarily, or many of them, to do very well. It is, the revenue level is rather low for people to keep going. So it's not surprising that they try, and people enter lotteries all the time with very little chance of winning, and they keep entering. But But this is on a bigger scale. People's livelihoods, if they're full-time. I mean, there are people, definitely, large numbers of developers who are full-time working on this who are not making enough money. Well, they could make a lot more money if they went and got a job. So, yeah, it's sort of surprising that it's sustained so well and is still growing. But in general, the structure of the market's not surprising. That's kind of how open platforms with very low barriers to entry work. The winners take all. The people who spend the most on marketing get to the top, and then they make more money so they can afford to spend more, and they stay there. And that's kind of how it is. So you don't see new apps breaking into the top 10s very often and things like that, in the top 10 grossing, that kind of thing. It doesn't happen much. It becomes fairly stable.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, definitely. But it raises the issue of monetizing, right, with the two pillars, which would be advertising or in-app purchase or paid apps, right? So it just underline this. Let's say it's an issue, like how do I get money with my apps? And we see that there's so much of ad networks claiming that you as a developer, you can earn your living like working with them. So it's really interesting to finally have the real figures with your study that not a lot of app developers earn and are profitable, right?
Yes. And actually, if you're only looking at in-app purchases, paid apps, or advertising, those are some of the worst revenue models. So our study covers all the different ways developers make money, and those ones that are right way down the bottom, way down the bottom. So the figures look worse if you were just looking at those. People who are doing contract work do a lot better. E-commerce does quite well. And selling things on a royalty basis or subscriptions, they're also relatively good models. But just paid downloads is terrible. Advertising is terrible. Most people that use those don't work well. Some people do okay with paid downloads, but it's like, 1 in thousands gets at the top, and they don't usually stay there very long in the paid market. And some companies with really, really massive scale do very well out of ads, but again, it's very, very few companies that do well out of ads. And the average developer shouldn't even really consider those as a viable business model if they want to make a living.
Yeah, really interesting, this finding. Moving to platform, we know there were a war for native platform, but from my point of view, I was I was trusting HTML5, will rise and web mobile, but your study end the discussion saying that developers use HTML5 but not for web mobile or hybrid app, and it's all native apps, right? So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think this trend has been showing for a while, but we actually got some very good figures this last time because we switched around exactly how we asked about it. So we asked who was targeting the browser. Lots of developers are still using HTML5, building hybrid apps in some way, but it's still, the numbers aren't massive. It's not as many as native, but they're the next most popular way to build apps after native. But targeting the browser was only down 15% of developers targeting the browser, and that, if you're thinking browser versus apps, and actually that ties up quite well if you looked at the latest study from Flurry on browser use versus app use. I think it's similar, sort of like 14% time in the browser, 80-odd% time in apps. A lot of those apps are games, but it's on that kind of level. Users have shown a preference for apps, and the browser struggles to keep up. The browser was designed for the desktop environment, or has evolved for the desktop environment, and it's rapidly trying to move over to apps. But there's a standardization process. It's very slow, so it takes a long time to catch up. And the platforms are still evolving. I mean, if you looked at the latest WWDC and Google I/O, they introduced a whole raft of new features. There was like 4,000 new APIs in iOS and 5,000 new APIs in Android, something like that. The browser doesn't have a chance of keeping up with that when there's a standards body that has to agree on what each thing will be. So they pick the high-level ones, but unless there's a real stall in innovation on the mobile platforms themselves, the browser's not going to catch up anytime soon.
Yeah. All right. So you just talked about games. So you found out that games represent 80% of App Store revenues, but it's only 30% of developer community. So does that mean that a non-game app are not profitable or cannot make money?
No. There are some issues around there. So first, shouldn't think that because 33% of developers are making 80% of the store revenues, that games are good for making money. There are some very small number of games that make a lot of money. The top games, the very top games like Clash of Clans from Supercell or Candy Crush Saga from King, they're making hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars every year. Most people make next to nothing still. So the distribution of revenues of games developers is not very different from the distribution of all developers' revenues. It's mostly people not making any money. Outside of games, people can make money, much more so on iOS than Android. So Android's 90% of the revenues on the Android store roughly are games. And on iOS, it's more in the high 70s, where the percentage of revenues from games. So there's more money in non-games on iOS, but you really have to pick a niche. So there are people, for example, making very good money with media sales, like things like Spotify, Pandora, Netflix, those kind of things. They're making good money on mobile. And there are people selling things through mobile platforms doing well. But if you want to actually just sell software and you're really focused on that, not some other service that happens to be wrapped in an app, then you need a very good niche, and you have to own it. And it has to be small enough that you're not going to be targeted by much bigger players who will give away what you're doing for free in order to get the audience, because that's the kind of thing that happens all the time in software. People use software as a hook for some other thing that they're trying to sell, or to get your data to sell to advertisers, etc.
That's right, yeah. Coming back to developers' habits, I found totally amazing that you're saying in the study that only 21% of developers are using users analytics tool, and it's less than last year. And I think it's totally amazing. So how do you explain that?
Yeah, that's a bit surprising. I mean, one thing is that there's been a very big growth in mobile developers. So there are new developers coming in all the time, and the ones that arrive now are more often inexperienced developers just starting out, rather than developers who've been doing something else in software for a long time, and they are less aware of what's available. In the shift to native, I guess people also, like, there are developers coming over from web technologies. They're used to having lots of analytics, but they may be not into using the mobile native ones yet. But also I think some developers have just abandoned them because they've not got value out of them. And I think that's their own fault. But I suspect, I don't think we really have any data on this, but there are a lot of developers who just do the basic integration of a user analytics tool. And what that really tells you is how many people are using your app and what kind of devices they have and how long they use it for, and that's it. And it only takes minutes to integrate, but actually doesn't tell you a great deal either that helps you build your app. So then when that same tool is responsible for your app getting rejected from Apple's App Store because they changed, like, you can't use the UDID, you can't use the advertising identifier, etc., and all of these analytics tools have been trying to use some of these IDs that Apple provided for other purposes to track people across apps, and they've been really trying to crack down and stop that happening. So there have been lots of times where, like, you'd have to upgrade to the newest version of the analytics tool or to get your app to pass, and developers hit these rejections because Apple doesn't announce these things in advance. They just start rejecting apps. If that happens to people, then they may well go, well, really, why am I still integrating this if they're not getting value out of it? So then they just drop it. It's hard to believe that the numbers are purely new people coming in, because it has come down such a way. I think it was 38% down to 21. So if people actually integrate it properly and set up a whole bunch of custom events so they know what's happening in their app, what users are doing, then they can get much more value out of it and figure out what to improve and why people weren't sticking around, etc. But yeah, it's interesting. And these tools as a whole were pretty low, but the user analytics had fallen from top spot to second or third.
Yeah, and we see like this couple of weeks, like there is a huge consolidation about analytical tools. We saw Flurry being bought by Yahoo, and today Tune announced Mobile Dev HQ. So it's really moving fast and consolidating tools. I guess it's another trend.
Yes. Yeah, one we predicted a while ago, actually, that the tools would consolidate. We call it rise of the mega SDK. So you'll go to one vendor who will give you like all the tools you need. I mean, Flurry was already doing that themselves. Like they started out with analytics, but then also advertising and crash analytics, and they add more and more bits, cross promotion in there. But yeah, and Google also offers a huge range of tools in one. Like you barely have to do anything to integrate them all because they kind of come ready with Android. And I think single purpose vendors will struggle because it's just someone else's stuff to go and download and get, and developers go for easy most of the time.
That's right, yeah. So my final question would be, what would be your advice for a young entrepreneur or developer willing to start an app business?
If someone is really trying to set out on their own or bootstrap from scratch, then they should really do some contract development work to keep the bills paid, because this is a very high-risk business. And yeah, you can win big, but if you want to bet everything, do it with someone else's money. Get some venture capital. Build your own products in your own time, or at least in time that you can afford to spend that's not paying the bills of your contract work first. And then focus on the apps as businesses. Don't think, what's a cool idea for an app? There's been some really good discussion on this online recently. A guy called Jared Sinclair made a really nice RSS reader called Unread, and it's beautiful, but it's an RSS reader which he launched like last year into the App Store, and there are an awful lot of them. And those tools for people who are basically really into tech and kind of iOS geeks, there are hobbyists providing free ones, and yeah, they're not as good, but people, if there's a decent working free alternative, not many people are going to pay. And if you want to compete in those kind of categories, they all have free competition or ad-supported competition or competition that's mostly free with an in-app purchase for some feature that not that many of the audience needs. And so there are so many options to sell at the kind of price you need to make money. That's tough. The kind of things that do make money are much more specialist. There's an analyst called Ben Thompson. He posted recently about a guy he knows who writes a Chinese dictionary. It's pretty specialist. He's licensing in Chinese dictionaries, but he makes good money on it. His in-app purchases, I think his lowest bundle price was like $40. So, if you can sell at that kind of price, then you can make money with independent software, small business. But if you're trying to sell to the masses at $1.99, you're basically like 99 cents. You've got to be really lucky as well as good. Okay, so find your niche, right? Yes, find a niche. And seriously think about the business model, because there are much better ways than sticking an app in the store with a price tag on it and hoping. All right. Mark, thank you very much. And I encourage everyone to download and go to VisionMobile website to download the study. Very useful, interesting. Thank you, Mark. See you later. Nice talking.